Tabletopped will start after the following messages.
Greetings, adventurers. I'm Max, and I compose background music and themes for tabletop games. Whether you're delving into Dungeons & Dragons, unraveling mysteries in Call of Cthulhu, or battling in Warhammer 40k, let my music set the perfect tone for your games. As a fellow tabletop enthusiast, I create tracks that resonate with your game's diverse realms, available on all major streaming services. Plus, I also offer custom commissions to tailor the perfect soundtrack for your unique campaigns. Ready for immersive gaming sessions across all genres? Visit Coltrane Compositions on Patreon for access to over 150 songs, including looped versions, that will make your game unforgettable. That's Coltrin Compositions.
Welcome back to Tabletop, everyone. Today we have our friend of the pod, Mac Leslie, on to talk about Stargrave. If you don't know what Stargrave is, it is maybe the best skirmish miniatures game that I've played in a long time. We'll see if that's true or not on this episode of Tabletop. Mac, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Nick. It was a pleasure to play the game with you and to try it out. And all I gotta say is I want to play it again.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what Stargrave is. So, Stargrave is a models agnostic skirmish miniatures game, and it's written and designed by Joseph A. McCullough and published by Osprey Games. We were talking to our friend Armando last night about how it seems like every single person is refinding this game right now. And we don't know if it's a dedicated marketing push, but it worked.
For sure.
Because we sat down and played. It's like, it's not too expensive of a book. It's like $25 for the rules, I think. But it comes with all of the form fillable sheets. And honestly, it is a super rules light system. Most of the value you're getting from the rule book is the basic rules, but then a huge amount of scenarios that you can use to play, and some narrative campaign stuff. So that's all super great. They come with form fillable PDFs too, so you can make your crews, print them out, all that kind of stuff. But just from the basic rules, Mac, you're somebody who reads, game rules all the time. You're a designer. How did this read to you?
Oh, extremely well. The book is laid out really, really well. Each section is very clear. A big part of playing a miniatures game for the first time is just how much do you grapple with the rules while you're playing. And I think that we had very few instances where we grappled with the rules while playing, and when we did, it was easy to look them up. And we did realize after playing that we did make a few rules mistakes, but even the system's so simple that even the rules mistakes we made, it's so easy to fix those. And also because we were both playing by the same rules, it kind of didn't matter.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like there was never a time where we were like, these rules are so hard to actually use, and so we came into like that sort of headache where you're like, what does cover mean? Like, what am I doing here? Instead, it was just, oh, I didn't read this rule, or I didn't remember this rule. Next time we'll slot it in. And like you said, the system is balanced, I think, super well, so that even if you don't, if at the table somebody drops a rule or something doesn't quite, function as it's supposed to, as long as everyone's doing it, it's fine.
Yeah, it doesn't break the game, which can happen with some of these games. If it's like, oh, I didn't read this one niche rule that my guy has, and now my guys seem useless and your guys seem crazy, and especially because you're sharing a lot of similar rule sets between the guys, especially so the game is set up in kind of a campaign system, and the initial rules before the campaign begins are very good for a teaching game. Because most of the weapons are the same. There is no such thing in the initial rules, as far as I could tell, as like a specific kind of weapon. Your guys either have basically a short-range gun, a long-range gun, a knife, or a handheld weapon that is better than a knife. And that's kind of it.
Yeah, the melee weapons literally go like your fist, which gives you a -2, which is bad. You have a knife, which everyone has, which is -1, which is bad. And then you have a hand weapon. I'm using air quotes because it literally says in the rules like this is anything from like a chain sword all the way down to like, like brass knuckles or like some sort of like armored fist or something. It can literally be anything. And going to your point too, a lot of the units you're using in your crews, it's all the same. Like there's no difference between the two crews. A lot of miniatures games can feel really overwhelming because you have to buy a certain faction or whatever, and then it's like you have a specific set of rules for the faction and you have to know them so well because your opponent is going to be playing a different faction that doesn't use the same rules at all. This game just kind of circumvents all of that by giving everybody the same list of mercenaries that they can essentially hire onto their crew at the beginning of the game, and they all function basically the same, except, and we were talking about this earlier, that each of them feels so specific. Like each of them has a thing that they do, and it's pretty clear right away what they're supposed to be, what you're supposed to be doing with them.
Yes, it's very nice, and so yeah, so the rule set is super easy to understand. And on top of that, they really pare it down by the game only uses a d20. That's
Mhm.
the only dice type I think that's used in the whole game.
Yeah, we
Because
used
it's
some other dice as like markers and stuff, but that was it. It was just a d20.
Yep, yep. And honestly, like we didn't have any tokens, so we were just using D6s and being like, okay, 1 represents this, 2 represents this, 3 represents that, and
Hmm.
just making it like it's really, really easy. You can even just make notes of what you want to do at your table, and you could use, the D6s you'd use for Warhammer, for
Hmm.
this. You could also just like at one point, one of my guys gained a levitate status, and I just took a blue post-it note, I ripped off a piece of it, and I attached it to the bottom of his base, and I was like, he's levitating now. And it was fine. Like, it
Yeah.
didn't matter. We didn't need to have, like, I replaced this mini with that mini, and both of these minis are $30 each, and, we could just use the stuff that Nick just had, like, kind of
Yeah.
lying around.
Yeah, the thing
Um,
that I love about this game is that it is agnostic to the miniatures. It's not like Warhammer where it's like if you don't have, a specific gun on your unit, you can't use that unit. You have to buy the model with that specific thing. This game is like fuck all of that. You guys just want to play with your little toy soldiers. You can
yep.
use any of them that you have, even like, whatever, you can use proxies, but basically the only limitation is everyone should try to be using the same size bases of their miniatures. And that's really it. And it's like, even in the rules, it's like, you don't have to do this, but it helps.
Yeah, and it's probably gonna create like tiny edge cases, honestly. It's like just use whatever you have and it'll
Yeah.
work out. I think that what made the rules so easy to read and so great for me is that the rules of the game are very clear that the game is not about killing. It
Hmm.
is about collecting. There are like
Yeah.
5 caches of resources throughout the map that are randomly determined if they're like physical resources or like data resources. And no matter what kind of resource it is, you have to like break it off of the map, kind of like with a pick, if it's a
Hmm.
physical resource, or you have to like hack a terminal. Um, and then your goal is to like hack those things, pick them up, and then get them off the board.
Yeah.
Um, which it's super clear. And there are soldiers that you can recruit that their whole thing is I hack things or I pick the things that you need. So it's like, okay, well, I have 8 dudes. I have my captain, my first mate, which are like the leaders. And
Yeah.
then it's like I should probably have one of each of those at least.
Yeah.
And there's freedom in that kind of limitation of now I kind of have 4 guys to figure out as opposed to 8, which just starting out can be huge. And then as you go through the campaign, you unlock loot, which then gives your guys like different equipment that you wouldn't
Hmm.
normally have at the beginning. But because you're unlocking it as a part of like a series, as part of a sequence, it feels almost it's not like an RPG campaign. It's more akin to like a legacy game.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree. It's sort of so like going back to sort of what a game looks like. You have, I think, for a two-player game, the smallest board you can do is a 2x2, 2 foot by 2 foot.
It's really 2 foot by
Like
2 foot's the
I think that's
smallest.
the smallest table that you can use. Again, this is like a very accessible game. You don't need a whole lot. Just throw some like some cans and some weird shit you have around your house for terrain, and it works
We
perfect.
used a tissue
But
box for like a big
yeah,
central Overwatch space.
yeah, and then what you do is you put a piece of data cache in the middle, and then you go in like turn order. Since you have a roll off, and then whoever wins the roll off gets to place the next piece of loot in their opponent's territory, because that is going to be where your opponent is probably going to be running first, because it's the closest piece of loot to them. I think that this just right away sets up a really cool thing where you can it's like X-Wing, another game that Mac and I
We
really
love,
like,
yeah.
where you can design the board right before you're playing, where you're like, okay, I see this like kind of like kill corridor. I'm gonna
Hmm.
put my like this objective here, and then there's even stuff like the physical objectives also slow you down essentially when you pick them up, so that it's hard because you're dragging something, so you're dragging something off the board, and so it slows you down, and you can't like I think you can't shoot as well because you basically have one hand. And so maybe you want to put all your physical tokens in a place where it's going to be really hard to maneuver out, so that you can kind of lock them in. And then like for data stuff, you could just say like, okay, data's easier to get. I'm going to put that stuff as far as like in the most inconvenient place for, Mac to get to. It's very fun where you immediately are starting to use like sort of a strategic brain. And that's another thing I really love about this, to your point of it's not about killing miniatures. None of our miniatures died in our
None, not
game,
one.
and it felt amazing.
Yeah, it felt so good because there's a
Yeah.
system in the game where all you have to do, just kind of like in a real fight, all you have to do is hit someone hard enough that they stop.
Yeah.
And if you deal, let's say, like 4 or more damage to someone in one hit, they get the stunned condition, which basically on your turn, you get 2 actions per miniature. One of them is a movement, one's not. And if they're stunned, they only get one or the other, basically. They only get one
Yeah.
action. We were playing as if they didn't get any actions when they were
Yeah.
stunned, and the game still worked, right?
Yeah.
But they get one action when they're stunned, and so even hitting someone hard enough to stun them, you feel like you have a lot of agency, both as the person whose character got stunned, because my character is stunned, they're not killed, and as
Yeah.
the person who stunned them. Oh, okay, I stopped them from getting to the objective. I made them drop the thing that they were
Yes.
holding.
And also the thing to that point about this game that I also really appreciate is that it's not really rubber banding, but they make it so that the feels bad moments are so low. Like there are no like I don't think in our game, even when you pulled a really good maneuver and I was like, that was so fun to lose to. Like there's very little feels bad moments, even though you're using a D20, which is very swingy.
Very
It
swingy.
feels great. And like you said, another thing that like an example of this like lack of feels bad moment is that if you get stunned, you drop an objective if you're holding it, but you also get a +2 to your cover for the rest of the activation, essentially, because your character is essentially hit the deck, is kind of hiding as best they can, so that all the rest of the gunfire that they're going to take is going to be mitigated in some way. So the game just right there is like, wow, you got hit really hard. That's not super normal. You probably need some cover, and we're going to give it to you. And it feels like the game is smart about making it so that it feels like everyone's still in it and competitive the whole way through.
Yeah, it's super cool and just gives you the game just does a great job of making you feel like powerful, but also making you feel like a little scared of things that your opponent is going to do in a way that creates stakes, in a way that's not like, I don't know. I've had games of Kill Team before that we've played, which is the Warhammer skirmish game, where it's just like I'm just lose.
Yeah.
Like
It's
you're
like
in
after
such a
turn
position.
one
Yeah,
sometimes.
after turn one, I've already lost, and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, like what's the point of playing this like 4 hour game? Like
Yeah.
if I know that I'm just gonna like not be able to recover from this, because losing one miniature in any of those kinds of things is brutal. And it happens so quickly. It happens all the time. In this, it has that rubber banding too of to get something off the board you actually have to remove your miniature from the board. That
Yeah.
member of your crew has run off the board and is gone.
Yeah, has basically
Which
run off with the treasure in a good way. Like you score the point,
yes,
but that miniature is not available to you anymore. So then it gives your opponent a time to be like, okay, I have the numerical advantage now. Maybe I can pull it out and like catch up to where they are, which I think is like you said, a great rubber banding mechanic that doesn't feel like I'm being penalized for winning.
hmm. And the other thing that's really cool about the game, should we talk about captain and first mate creation a little bit?
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, so captain and first mate creation. Nick just brought the stuff over to my house, and we hadn't played the game. I hadn't played the game at all, and
Hmm.
I didn't even know what it took to like make your character, because you design your
Yeah,
main two characters, and then the rest are kind of like standard issue guys that you buy with credits. You have like 400
yeah,
credits to buy them with. It doesn't really matter, but the way that you make the captain is very cool. So your captain is like the main character of your crew. Um, and like, if you were gonna play like a space role playing game and then use this for combat, it would probably be the player character that you're
yeah,
playing.
yep,
And they have a base stat line that is the same no matter what. It's just the same. Then you have a class that you choose, which is very thematic and adds or subtracts a little bit from each of those stats and maybe gives you some choice. Then you get 5 abilities, and at least 3 of them have to come from like this specific pool of abilities that you get. But then 2 of them can come from any other place in the whole game.
yeah.
It can come from any other guy. And the powers that they have, I thought at first it was going to be really confusing, but the rule book, in a lot of books, I mean, I don't know how many pages of spells and abilities there are in the PHB. It's
Hmm.
expensive.
Yeah,
In this game, I think there are 3 pages of powers.
yep,
Um, and even then, there's some redundancy there. So it's
yeah.
not like actually even 3 pages worth.
And there's like a pretty good mix of damage dealing powers if you want to set yourself up to be that. But then there's like a huge amount of utility powers that feel really fun to use. And like you said, I want to kind of go back to the creation of it. So you pick a class, which is essentially where you can get those first three core abilities that you need to take from your class. Like there's veteran and a mystic and like all this different stuff. And I will say that they've done a insanely good job of making it customizable so that your crew feels like whatever you want it to feel like. Do you want to be like a space cowboy that is, just like a Han Solo taking loot and moving it around? You can do that. There's like a whole rogue class and there's like cool abilities. Like one of my favorites is called transport, which is essentially like you call in someone to essentially pick up a model and like move them 6 inches across the board, as long as you can see it. It's like that's very powerful and is also great. It's like giving someone an escape route and stuff like that. But you can also customize it with the other classes. Like you said, those last two, you are penalized a little bit in that it's harder to activate these powers. You have to roll a higher number on the d20. However, it still is like very viable to take powers from other classes and then just like make it so it's like, okay, my guy is like a veteran of a war, but he's also like a cyborg, so he has some like robotic skills, and like that can be done very easily. So you can make a intensely customizable crew that feels very thematic very quickly.
And without the rules bloat too that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
get from
yeah, yeah.
a lot of RPGs. I mean, RPGs, miniature tabletop miniature games. Is what I mean. Like, I play in Kill Team. I play the novitiates, which are like the space
Space
nuns.
nuns.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating to play them, I must say, because I was like, oh, these cool nuns, I'll paint them up, but they each have like an individual specific weapon, and some
Yeah.
of them have auras, and some
Hmm.
of them have like special abilities that they can do only to one other member of your squad.
Yeah.
It's so freaking complicated, and that's like kind of how it is in a lot of miniature tabletop games.
Yeah.
You know, but just having, I have 2 guys that have special powers, and everyone else, their whole deal is just trying to get the caches and stop the
Hmm.
other people that are trying to get the caches. And in combat, also, there are a few things that they do to really simplify and really make the game easy to play. The first thing is the line of sight system. Do you want to talk about the line of
Oh
sight system,
god.
Nick?
So yeah, line of sight is maybe my least favorite mechanic in any miniature skirmish game, especially if it's like sci-fi or whatever, something with guns, because it's always like, okay, you draw like a line from this base to the opposing base. If it like you can't, but you can from one side of the base but not the other, then it means this. And like if the head is exposed, then this means this. None of that applies. All it is you lean down, look from the level of your miniature. Can you see the other thing? Yes, you can see that person. Are they 25% covered by something else? They have light cover. Are they 50% covered by something else? They have heavy color cover. And that is it. That is it. And it's just a +2 or a +4 on their defense dice when they roll it after you start shooting at them. It's very simple. Another thing I love about this game is that like your captain, all of your crew have stat lines, but it is one line of stats and there's probably only 6 numbers, and all of them are just like, I add this number to a d20, I subtract this number from a d20. It is so simple that it's just easy to just get into the actual mess of the skirmish, you know what I mean?
Yes, and all of the descriptions are very clear, right? In some miniatures games, like what is it in Warhammer? It's like I can't
it,
remember.
it's literally like, okay, you have to at the beginning of the game, you have to say, okay, this is what each of these types of cover are, because there are certain types of
Yeah.
cover that do different things for different people. And then it's like, okay, can you draw a line from both ends of the base to both ends of the other character's base? If you can't, then they have some form of cover. And then it's like, can you do one unobstructed? Okay, that's great. But that means that, and there's like 3 different covers even within that small niche
Right,
thing.
and what are the like the attack values called? It's like
Oh
I
yeah,
have
it's
a
like it's weapon skill versus like toughness versus like my saves, and but
yeah, there's so many different
there's
things. And in
yeah
this,
there
it literally is
God
move. And the number is how many inches you can move.
yeah
Fight, which is how well you fight in close combat and how will you avoid being shot.
yeah
There's shoot, which is how well you shoot.
yep
There is armor, which I'll talk about in a second, which I'll talk about armor in a second. It's so
yeah
cool. There's will, which just interacts with powers and cracking data and things. And at first, when we were playing the game, Nick was still learning it. I was like, "What does will do?" And he was like, "Oh, I don't know. I'll have to look it up." I'm like, "It's probably how you activate powers and how you
that's
like
the
crack
thing.
the
Yeah,
data caches, right?" And he was
yeah,
like,
you
"Yeah, that
hit
is
it
it."
exactly right, where like you look at the stat line and you're like, I know exactly what each number does immediately, just from like vague knowledge of games.
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah,
And then okay, so going back to armor. So armor is a higher number and it's not like plus or minus. It's just a number. It's a number I think from like 9 to 13 when you
yeah,
start. So I'm looking at my captain right now who has an armor score naturally of 9. And then they are wearing like a big mech suit thing, so they have a +4. But it's like light
hmm
armor is a +1, heavy armor is a +2 or 3. I don't
yeah,
remember. But anyway, so when you get if someone fights you or they shoot you, how it works is, let's say you're fighting in close combat. The person attacking you, and you roll your fight. Whoever wins, whoever got higher fight, then subtracts the enemy's armor from the number they got. So, for example, Nick and I are fighting. We both have a +0. I'm attacking him, but Nick rolls a 19, and I roll a 3, right?
hmm
Nick got 16 more than me, but my guy has 13 armor. I take 3 damage.
yeah. and
It's
that
easy.
and that is one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of miniature death, is that even if you have a huge swingy gap, which d20s are just going to give you most of the time, you're not going to have like a crazy number. Like you're never taking 10 damage, right? It's just like you're usually taking 5 or less, and your characters have like 15 to 20 health.
Yeah, I have a character. My captain is like kitted out to have a lot of health because you have to spend health on powers.
Yeah,
And she's like kind of like a wizard type thing. So she has 17 health, and that's a ton. And then
yeah,
compared to like a runner, which is a basic crew member that is just designed to run things off the board and doesn't really do anything else, they have 12.
yeah,
And they have 9 armor as opposed to my captain's 13. So and I mean, you hit one of my guys, I think for like 7
yeah.
once. And
Yeah.
that was a huge like
That was like
moment.
that kept me in the game for like 2 extra rounds.
Yeah,
Because
and
you were
it didn't kill my guy.
Yeah, and it didn't kill your guy. It was essentially like you had this thing, you were about to run it off the board, and I with my sniper was able to hit you with that. That forced you to drop the thing. It also kind of makes your next turn worse for that character. So unless you have a lot of models around them to assist them, you're kind of actually buying yourself a full other turn as the other person gets rid of the condition and repositions themselves. So it's like, again, things feel really important every turn, which is really fun.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool positioning. And then also it's like, okay, you don't deal damage, but in melee, you can like push people away. You can push them like
Hmm.
off of a ledge, or you can just get them like out of melee combat with you. Because it's
Or
really
you
hard
can
to
pull
shoot.
them in and keep them in melee combat, which is hugely important too, because they can't crack or grab a objective if you're fighting with them. So there's a whole crew member that is designed. It's like the super trooper or whatever. It's like the guy in the mech suit, and he's designed to stand at an objective that you're not ready to pick up and run with yet, and force other people to fight with him so that he can, essentially protect an objective from moving. And that becomes super important because, like, Mac, I kind of want you to go through the order of ops of how you essentially like made the game turn uh point win that you had, where you relayed something off the board. Like,
Yeah, so I had an ability called Levitate. And I believe what Levitate does, let me make sure I'm not like talking out of my ass here. Um, yeah, Levitate is a power that, oh, anti-gravity projection is what the power is called, but it gives the
yep.
status Levitate. So basically, the target figure gains the Levitate attribute for the rest of the game. And what Levitate does is it never suffers any movement penalty for moving over rough terrain or climbing.
Yep.
So we had like these low terrain things, and how you count movement over terrain in this game is so simple. You
Hmm.
literally measure how tall the terrain is for like
Yep.
low enough terrain, and then you just like subtract the number of inches you have from your move by how tall the thing is on both sides. So like
Yeah, because it's
up one, down one.
basically, yeah, if you're jumping through a window and the window is 1 inch tall on the board, then and you have 8 inches, then you go 2 up to the window, 1 up, and then 1 down out of the window. That's 4 inches, and then you have another, 4 or whatever it is that you're
Right.
moving.
So I had placed one of these cases that you have to crack behind a wall. And my whole plan was every turn, all I did with my first mate was cast this projection on one of my crackers, the guys that open up these cases. And I had positioned 3 of them right there. So basically my turn became first mate goes. When your first mate or captain goes, they can activate 3 guys around them. He casts levitate on the third guy. First guy cracks the case, moves it over to the second guy, who picks up the case, who moves over to the third guy, who picks up the case and runs off the board.
And that scored Mac a point, and literally a game-winning amount of objectives is 3. So right there with that one turn, he essentially had gotten a third of the points he needs to win the game, which becomes very important because then I'm like, okay, I either need to figure out how to stop him from progressing at other objectives, or I need to focus on easy to get objectives to try to catch up, and that becomes like a whole part of the strategy as well.
Right, and the game is actually played. I discovered this in the rules because we played a short game, but I discovered in the rules that you play the game until all 5 are off the board.
Yeah.
But if you get 3, you have 1, and then the other person can try and get like as many as they can, because the more of these caches that you get and the kinds of caches you get actually determine the kind of loot that you get, which is all like rolled on tables. Then you can equip your guys with it, or you can sell it to buy better guys. It's
Yeah.
such a cool system.
Yeah, like the data stuff is easier to run off the board because you don't have to drag it. But when you're rolling on the tables of what's inside after the game, it's all basically just money because you're selling information. However, if you have a physical loot box that you're trying to drag off, at the end you get to roll, and sometimes it's like, this is like alien tech. You have like an alien tech gun now that you can equip one of
Mm-hmm.
your guys with, which has become super cool, because then you're like, this guy, it naturally sort of evolves into like a story progression where you're like, yeah, that last like mission that we ran into you guys, like I found this gun, and now guess what? I get to use it against you, which is great.
Yeah, it's super cool. And I think that the system also has some rubber banding in there where the person that loses gets more experience to upgrade their captain and their first mate, but the person that
Yep.
wins gets more stuff. So you can keep playing against the same person, and it's not going to feel like they're very far behind you, which is exciting.
There's also
Uh,
a way, like there's like your ship, which is sort of like outside of the game. It is where your guys go after the missions, but it also allows you to. I'm not super familiar with this because it was all in the campaign section. But like you can upgrade your ship to do specific things that will help because there are certain powers and stuff like that that you do before or after a game is over. So like there's one that basically there are these huge mech suits that you have to pay just to play a game in them because they are very powerful. However, there is a power that you can roll once before a game that you might not have to pay the credits for that mech suit.
oh,
And I think you
cool.
can upgrade your ship and stuff to make it so that that is way easier to do. Which is very cool, because then you're like, okay, the specialty of my crew as we keep going through this like campaign is everyone suited with mech suits now, because that's what we want to do, and we've made our ship so that I can pay far less to be able to do that, rather than having to pay like 500 credits every game, you know.
Yeah, yeah. It's just incentivizes you to keep playing, and it's exciting, right? We After we played, we kind of knew we were going to scrap our crews and like make new ones
Yeah.
because we just didn't know how the game works. But we still were rolling on the tables, and man, rolling on those tables is real fun.
Yeah, the treasure tables, it's like, oh cool, I found this like piece of archaeotech, that's great.
Yep.
And then there is another thing I want to kind of stop and talk about the powers specifically and how they work, because in other games, whenever you have like special abilities in a miniature, it can feel really clunky and hard to use. This is so simple. It is, you roll a d20, you add your will score, and if you have beat a certain number that's on each of the powers, then that means the power activates. Then there's a thing called strain. If it has strain, it means that it just costs you a little health to be able to activate it. And that happens if you roll over that number. So let's say there's, I think one that's like psychic lightning. You roll, you have to beat a 14. My will is 2. That means I have to roll a 12. I do. That means that it like the effect goes off, but it costs 1 strain. So I have to actually take 1 damage as I shoot lightning out of my hands or whatever.
Yep.
Very easy.
And on top of that, you can pay more health to bump your score up.
I didn't know that. Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Oh
So
yeah.
it
So let's
also,
say that like this is the game winning point. I have like 6 health left with my wizard, and I need a 10 to activate. I got a 6 total. I only have 6 health, but I could pump that by 4 by taking
yeah,
4 damage.
yeah,
For more damage. And then I take 1 extra strain. So I'd be at 1 health, but I'd be able to I'd be able to close out the game. So the game is very like, okay, you can do it, but you're just gonna have to pay.
yeah.
And there's a lot of agency there. There's a lot of choice
Yeah, because like
in how that
early in
works.
the game, maybe it's not important for that power to go off as much as that in that last turn. So maybe you're willing to, do 10 damage to your captain to bump up a really crappy roll to get a power off in the last turn. Whereas at the beginning, you would just let that action essentially go. You lost
Like
that action,
fizzle.
but nothing
Yeah.
bad happens. Um, Another thing is that this game, so all of those rules that we just talked about, that is all within the first 63 pages. This is
Yeah.
like a 200 page book, I think, and all
Yeah.
of that is out of the way in the first quarter. The rest of it is just random encounters. There's a ton of PvPvE situations where it's like, there's a giant space monster in this area as well. So these mercenary teams are coming in to try to get the loot, but there's also this huge monster that's like ripping people apart that you have to be careful of. There's other ones that's like, the type of loot that's around is going to be slightly different, or maybe the objectives move because it's like underwater and the tides are moving them around. There's a lot of really cool things that adds a lot of replayability to this game, which I think is really, really fun. And there's, I guess the only thing that I would say that this game is not very good for is like competitive play. I guess it's very sort of like kitchen table-y, let's have some fun. It's not sort of like you're going to go to a tournament and play Stargrave.
Yeah, I
Um,
haven't heard anything about a tournament scene. There very well could be one. Someone, let us know in the comments or whatever if there is, because it would be cool to
we'll go.
go. I
Yeah.
mean, but the thing is, it seems like it would actually do that quite well. Because
Yeah.
it seems like it would be super cool. Because I know some people do this with Warhammer where they do like a league, right? Where it's
Hmm.
every week you go and they have some sort of campaign system. And, there's all these different things that we've never played with in Kill Team. But in Stargrave, I don't know. It seems like it could be the kind of thing where, like, if you have a league even of like 4 people,
Hmm.
it's like cool. Like we play a game, and whoever wins that game, the winners play each other, the losers play each other, and you just keep going back and forth like that forever.
And then the other option too is like the winners play each other, the losers play each other. Maybe then it's like everyone plays each other, because this game can be 4-player around a table and everyone just enters from the corners. Like it's just so accommodating. This is like the most accommodating game I've played in a long time, where it's just like you can do what you want to do with it.
Yes, and it doesn't fight you. It doesn't fight you to play it. That's the thing about a lot of miniatures games that really frustrates me. And even X-Wing, we love X-Wing.
Yeah.
X-Wing is great. There are some things about it that are very hard to learn. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole, like, in X-Wing, there's a whole thing where when you move a ship, you have to like specifically like put this template to the front of the ship and move the ship along the template and put it on the end. Which, once you know the game, it feels so good to
Yeah.
do that. But before you learn the game, it's tough. It's tough to know,
Yeah.
like, how precise do I have to be? And the answer is like perfect.
Yeah.
Whereas in this game, it's kind of like, I don't know. It doesn't fight you to play it. It doesn't. The rule system is so easy to understand. Everything is like, as long as you're both playing by the same rules, it kind of doesn't matter. And because you can play with any minis you just have,
Hmm.
I mean, you could play this game where it's like, I don't know, like you literally take pennies and, like you put
Yeah.
like a matchstick, you just glue it to the penny. And like,
Yeah.
great, I'm the pennies that we've put a silver Sharpie on, and you're not. And we do
Yeah.
it that way. And we do line of sight by if you can see the matchstick or not. You could play this game with that, and it would
Yeah.
work.
No, to your point too, like a lot of TTRPG players, usually you can like print out like a little piece of paper that has like a character or like a monster drawn on it, and you cut it out and you stick it on one of those little stands, and like that, you can do that here. Like that does not detract from the game at all.
Yeah, you could use
um,
cardboard standees, even.
yeah,
Yeah, you
absolutely.
could
And
use like Gloomhaven standees.
yeah, and this is the thing that I like a lot about this game, is that it is a perfect way, if you are a miniatures game person, to tempt and then hook somebody into a miniatures game,
Uh
because it is so
oh.
easy. Yeah, exactly. I did it to Mac. It's
True.
like it's so easy to just show up. You had not read the rules, and
Not at all.
we just sort of threw together something and we played. We had a blast, and now we've been talking about playing our next game like for the last like week. And now we understand the game better, so it's going to be even better. But I just think that this is such a great entry point into the space of like miniature skirmish games. And you can also play it at different levels very easy. Like I could see like a 14-year-old playing this no problem, but also like maybe if you're, our age and you want to be really strategic about it, you can also do that, because the way it's structured is that the mechanics are so smart that you can either pay a lot of attention to them or a very little amount of attention to them and still have fun either way. I really like the way that they designed this game.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier with the first mate, but remind me, stop me if you mentioned this before too, is activations, how activations
Mm.
work.
No, I was like actually wanting to come back to this, and this is what I mean by like you can play this very intentionally or not at all and still have fun. Talk about the way that
Yeah.
turn orders work.
Right. So in something like Kill Team, for example, you go back and forth, and you each activate one miniature at a time, back and forth and back and forth, which is good. It's nice. It's back and forth play is good. This game really simplifies it. You have up to 8 guys on the field, and because some soldiers are cost 0, you're always going to have 8 to start.
Hmm.
And the game is designed for your captain and your first mate to break up into kind of 2 squads, because when it just goes, you do a roll off, whoever gets highest, their captain activates first. And when they activate their captain, the captain, you mark where the captain began,
Yep.
and then anything within, I think it's 3 inches of the captain, can activate along with the captain in any order, as long as you complete its full activation. So, let's say I have a case cracker, or I have a case cracker next to my captain, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to move that case cracker up towards one of the cases. I can do that, and then my captain can activate, and he can command that case cracker to move more. And then the
Which is
2 other
super,
guys
yeah.
near my case cracker can then activate, right? So I get
Hmm.
to activate 4 guys.
and,
Then
and
it goes back
it's
to the
also
other
like a
player.
way to punish players that aren't playing very strategically. It's like, let's say you're just like, I want to run my captain in and beat up some guys, because your captain is always going to be your beefiest, most powerful piece on the board. If you do that and your squad isn't keeping up with them and they get separated in that activation phase, you can't activate the rest of the squad that's near them, because they have to be within 3 inches in line of sight. So there's also like a really interesting thing about positioning of like, okay, my captain's really powerful, but do I really want to go on my own with him? Because otherwise, all of those crew members have to go at the very end of my turn, which is actually really, really bad.
Yeah, it can be really rough. And it helps keep in your head where all of your guys are too,
Hmm.
because you're incentivized to keep them in kind of like 2 squads. There were definitely moments when I played Kill Team in the past with, like, when you have 10 individual miniatures, each with their own ability set, where I've had like just evenly spread all of my novitiates all through the board, and it's just brutal to keep that all
Yeah.
in your head. It's
Yeah.
just you lose it immediately, and you can't remember what you were trying to do. And this is it's great because it keeps everything like very, very streamlined and easy to parse mentally, which miniatures games are not known for
Yeah.
at
So,
all.
and I'm not sure, I probably interrupted you right before you were about to explain this, but like the other thing that's great is that even if you lose a roll off, that the person who won's captain goes first. If there are up to 3 squad members within 3 inches of that captain and within line of sight, then those 3 can also activate, and you choose the activation order. However, after that captain phase is done, the other player's captain phase starts. So you're not ever going to be like so far behind, like in Warhammer, like you said, where it's um, side based initiative, where all of my guys go and then someone else's all of their guys go. Because I think that also prevents that kind of hyper swingy thing of like, all of my guys go, I've killed 4 of your people, I win.
Yep.
like that doesn't happen, because it's staggered, so that even if you're losing the initiative, it's only for one section of the board, not the whole board at once, which is great.
Yeah, and it's also that when you lose that activation and they attack you, I mean, oftentimes in a miniatures game, like, you don't want to be the one exposing yourself first.
Yeah.
You want to be the guy that, like, I'm gonna wait until you're out in the open, then I'm gonna jump out and shoot you. Like, that's what I
Hmm.
want to happen here. As opposed to, like, okay, great, I'm gonna run up and I'm gonna crack the case first. Well, good, crack it for me, because I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna beat the crap out of your guy, I'm gonna take that case, and I'm running it off the board, baby.
Yeah.
It's just it doesn't feel like the first player has a huge advantage. It also doesn't feel like the second player has a huge advantage either. It feels very balanced in that way.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit now that we're kind of coming to a close. We've been ranting and raving about how good this game is, but I also want to talk a little bit about utility of it, because like I could also see, like, both of you and I have experimented with using other systems in our TTRPG games to kind of like spice up an encounter or like a specific thing. I could see this being a really easy add into a D&D campaign, or really any sort of TTRPG campaign, where it's like, okay, maybe in this specific case, instead of a combat encounter in the old way of like I'm firing, fireballs or whatever, maybe it's a sci-fi campaign and you're like, I'm looking for some way to like have a resource collection moment where like they're trying to get like information from like an enemy cabal of cyborgs or whatever, but they're going to be trying to stop us. Like, you could just jump everybody into this game, and as long as they're familiar with like a D20 system, everyone will be able to do that one off very quickly, like very easily too. And you could make a facsimile of all of your crew beforehand. Very simple. I think that it actually has a lot of utility in that way.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely legs for that. I think that also it might be good in kind of like a Powered by the Apocalypse system, where it's like this system is actually not designed with D20s in mind. This system is more narratively designed. It's not really designed for a big skirmish. So
Mm-hmm.
having a moment where it's like, okay, let's say you have 4 players, right? You can even skew the rules of this to be like, great, each player gets just a captain and 3 dudes. And
Yeah.
then it can be great, like you're working with some kind of faction, and those 3 dudes represent like the NPCs in that faction. And then the GM can play, a full squad. Honestly, can
Yeah.
play a full squad against you. Um, and then it's like fair,
Yeah.
basically.
It also would be a pretty interesting way of mitigating PvP in some ways. Like if you had a moment where the party was forced to like go against itself in some way, maybe they're working for rival factions or something. This is a good way of doing that because it's not going to make anyone feel bad. No one's going to die most likely unless someone makes a real concerted effort. But yeah, like you could also do it that way. One thing that like, man, this game is just so flexible. Like something that just occurred to me is that if you were playing long term in this system and you're like, man, this guy's captain is really kitted out and powerful now, I need to figure this out. You could spend an entire match just trying to kill the captain, because if you do that, then they take on essentially battle wounds going forward. So like you can literally spend an entire game and say like, I might lose this match, I might not get many credits to set myself up well for the next game, but I'm going to make it so his captain is less effective next game, which is great because like if like you were talking about, Mac, if you're playing a league or something, that could be huge. Like, okay, someone on my team or whatever is going to is going to meet this guy. If he wins in the next round, what I can do for my teammate is I can try to break his like first mate or his captain's ability to be as effective as possible going forward, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, it's neat, and I'm actually looking at the rules right now for like captain and first mate getting wounded and stuff. If
Hmm.
you like kill a captain, it's only you roll on a table, and it's only on a natural 1 are
Yeah.
they dead,
Yep.
which is huge.
Hmm.
Um, and then it's I think 7 or less. They get hurt in
Yeah.
some way, which is nice. It makes you feel like, okay, I can do something to maybe stop this guy, but also like the chances of me actually taking away my friend's like
Yeah.
really cool captain that they've worked so hard to build is very low. And if that
Yeah.
captain dies, it's statistically improbable, and it's cool for the story, I guess, that you're playing.
Yeah.
Like you're out of this little campaign you're playing.
We totally missed that you still have natural ones and natural 20s, and
You do.
they still feel good. Like a 20 is always going to hit unless somebody rolls a natural 20 on their fight score to dodge, then they always get it. So it's like, I don't know, it's just fun. You still have those moments of like, oh shit, I just got a nat 20. That's like a 26. You rolled like a 10. I'm still doing like damage to you because I rolled this crazy critical hit. Like it's very fun. Like it feels good still. You have those moments of celebration.
Mm-hmm.
Mac, we were kind of talking about this, and I actually had the designers of D&D Onslaught on to talk about that game. And I bought it for you for Christmas. We've played it. We were kind of talking, we're like, it kind of feels like a better D&D Onslaught in some ways, just because it's more flexible. You know what I mean?
It's more flexible. The system, I think itself, for me,
Yeah.
is it's more flexible. It gives me more. That being said, D&D Onslaught comes with cool minis.
Yeah, fucking
Set
rocks.
in the D&D worlds and stuff. It has lore in it, which is very cool for D&D players. It works on a grid, so there's no measuring, which can be a lot
Yeah.
simpler. But even though it has the cool dials and all like these things to make it really streamlined and more simple, and it's a D20 system too, it is more complicated than Stargrave.
Yeah, in a crazy way. It feels like so much more effort to remember all of my abilities and what I'm doing. Whereas this one, even though you have the probably even more powers than in D&D Onslaught, because usually you only have like 2 or 3 on your little dial, like this just feels easier because you're like, okay, I have all the cards of what everything does in front of me. All of them have pretty simple but effective like results when they go off, and it just feels more streamlined and better.
Yeah, and it's very clear like what each power is designed to do.
Yeah.
Even if even if like the actual like little paragraph that describes the power is long, usually it's like, I'm looking at my captain right now. I do not have the powers in front of me, and I even remember now. It's like camouflage makes me harder to hit. Dark energy, range DPS. Void blade makes my sword better. Life leech, it does that exactly what I just said. It leeches
Yeah.
life. And mystic trance activates an ability before the game begins.
Yeah.
That's
It's
it.
like it's crazy good too because like it's just so thematic in that you could get into like you built that novitiate so that if someone gets close to them, they turn on that void blade and they're just slicing through armor and like beating people up, and they become a monster, which is what they're supposed to do in the lore. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
the novitiates in Warhammer are just like close up crazed lunatics that like hack people apart. And so that immediately feels amazing because you're like, yeah, this is exactly what this model is, even though it's a completely different, universe or whatever.
Yeah, and I was just like, I don't know, my novitiate leader lady has like a giant cool sword, and I want her to be able to use that
Yeah.
because she never gets to use it in Kill Team, because the
Yeah.
second I get her in a melee, she's dead. Um, yeah, it's very cool to think like, because honestly, it was just like looking at that model that I was like, oh, what kind of thing could I make? And so you can really actually just like use the models that you bought and you painted and and you can play with them without it
Yeah.
just being a big deal.
And we're giving the very base level game, like the information from the base level game that we played. There's so much stuff you can add on. Like there's poison effects. There are flamethrower characters where it actually in the back of the book comes with different like cutouts that you can use to like track like it's flame essentially. It's like anything within this out from your mini is affected by the flamethrower. There's grenades, smoke grenades that make things really interesting because it obscures sight, and so you can and one of the powers, even in our simple game that you used, basically put up like a telekinetic wall that no one could shoot through, but you could see through. And so it became this thing of like, Darth Maul and Obi-Wan like looking at each other through the force field of like, who's going to go first?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely, because we have meta knowledge, right? As the
Yeah.
people controlling these guys, you can almost imagine that we're like in a freaking helicopter or something going over the
Yeah.
battlefield and giving them all commands.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's like you can't draw a line of sight through that wall, but it's like we know where the guys are on the other side of the wall, and we know like where we're gonna die if we go through it.
Yeah.
Which is super cool. Just a lot of like movement abilities. I'm like looking at my first mate now, and it's like everything I took. It's like I took pull, lift, and fling, which it's like it's all just about like moving people around and um as opposed to killing things, which is just so much of it feels better
Yeah.
than the feels bad of like I killed your guy that you spent 10 hours painting and you were really excited to put on the board. It's like
and
great,
it And it's
cool.
also it's also like if you roll a nat one, it's not like my entire turn was a waste. It's usually your gun jams, and you have to spend an action unjamming your gun, which you can do on the same turn if you shot first. So there's like it's a very forgiving game in some ways, but it's also like the person who's thinking better is gonna win. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It seems very fair in that way of like if you're just going in with no plan, you're probably gonna lose 100% of the time. But if you go in with like a decent play and you're able to execute it, then you stand a chance of winning basically against any composition of crews. So it's very cool. As you can probably tell, I think, really like this game, Mac. Would you agree?
Yeah, I wholly recommend this game. I definitely recommend at least going and like purchasing the PDF copy of the game,
Yeah.
and even just taking a look, just like checking out. I think that our friend Armando said that he was watching some like Let's Play videos on YouTube and stuff. There's some stuff out there for it. Definitely recommend it. It's so fun. It's so good.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually a Let's Play sort of series that kind of demonstrates how flexible the game is lore-wise, where it's they actually use a Warhammer, like a from the first Warhammer edition had like a D1000 table of like situations or scenarios that you can be in. So they were just like using that to set the stage, and then they would pick one of the scenarios that fit with it, and then they were like, okay, so this is like day 2 on this world where we're trying to like get as many like, you know, pieces of archaeotech as possible before the warp consumes the world again. But there's also chaos war bands coming in to stop us, and it became like immediately super cinematic and immediately set in whatever world they wanted. So yeah, I just think that it's very hard to beat the value that Stargrave gives you just by purchasing the book. It becomes very flexible. You can play. The games don't take forever. Like we
No,
played in an hour and a half, and
we were
that
done by
was
like 9.
9 o'clock. It was awesome.
Yeah, like oh crap, I can just veg for the rest of the evening. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really fun. And I would say that anybody looking for a new miniatures game, this is one that I would highly suggest. Again, it's Stargrave by Osprey Games. That's who publishes it. You can go on their website. They also have narrative campaigns that you can purchase for them as well, that are like extras. If you're like, yeah, this sounds cool, but I hate sci-fi. Guess what? They have another one called Frostgrave. Basically, the same exact rule set, and instead of like a captain and first mate, you're a wizard and a wizard's apprentice, and
Cool.
people are like, you know, running around using axes and arrows and stuff like that instead. Basically, the same rule set, except I think Stargrave is actually a little bit like more finely tuned. So I think it's great. All right, Mac, if we've settled that this game is worth a pickup, then I guess we can start heading to the exit. But first, I wanted to give you the chance. Is there anything you want to promote? I know you're still in the midst of playtesting Mnemosyne. We're going to be probably doing an episode within the next few months around playtesting in general and how that works. But anything else you want to promote?
No, I don't know. Go out, support a local game store, buy stuff from them. That's all. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Go to your local game store, see if they have Stargrave, purchase it from them. That's gonna be great. And also, the art in this book is like bonkers, bananas, wild, cool. So purchase it; it's worth it.
Yep.
Everyone, Tabletopped, if you enjoyed this episode, releases every Monday. So why don't you head down to that little subscribe button and hit it? We'll see you next Monday with another episode. If you want us to review a specific system or talk about a specific topic, you can go to our website, tabletopod.com. There's a contact form right on the first page there, and whatever you send will come directly to us, and we will read it. It might take us a little bit to get to the topic, but we will hit that topic. And yes, I'm talking to you, my friend who sent in the request to review Dragonbane. We are going to do it, I promise. Everyone else, have a great week, and we will see you next Monday for another episode of Tabletopped.